This is North Georgia's News Talk.
WDUN. This girl is on fire.
Welcome back to Game On, folks. 6 minutes after 7 o'clock on this Monday evening on WDUN. I love writers. I appreciate the ability some have to tell stories, but I really appreciate those with the ability to make a real life tale read like a story. I've mentioned before Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard's Killing Kennedy. They also wrote Killing Lincoln and Killing Jesus, but Killing Kennedy. What makes it such a great read is that the story is told like a thriller novel. You know the end result. You know the outcome. It isn't revisionist history, but the build-up to the moment Lee Harvey Oswald pulls the trigger is page-turning drama in its truest form. And there have been several books come out on the sports beat that are that way as well. I point to Sally Jenkins' memoirs about Pat Summitt, or Pat Summitt's memoirs, I should say. The book was Sum It Up. It was like that. I followed Tennessee women's basketball pretty much my whole life. I knew a lot of the stories that were being told, but it's the way they were told. The little nuances thrown in there. Seth Davis, college basketball writer, analyst for Sports Illustrated and CBS Sports, has written that kind of book about John Wooden. It's called Wooden, A Coach's Life. Seth was kind enough to speak with me this past Friday at length, and we're going to bring you the conversation in two parts. This upcoming is obviously the first one, and we began with simply what led to him wanting to write such an extensive book on a man who has had no shortage of books written about him.
Well, you know, I had, as someone who covers college basketball for Sports Illustrated, I had spent some time around Wooden and read about Wooden and learned about Wooden, and I just really felt like there was a deeper story to tell than the one that had been presented, you know. I mean, we think of him as a sweet old guy reading poetry in his den, but suffice to say, you don't win 10 national championships by being sweet. And I just felt like he had been presented as this two-dimensional figure, you know, never had a flaw, didn't have a bad day, never had a problem, and that's not real life. And that's, you know, I deal in real life as an everyday journalist. So, you know, I approach this as a journalist and a historian and a biographer, and to write about that third dimension, which is not to say that this book is a takedown by any stretch. It is not. But it is the truth, and it is a fuller portrait than anything that's ever been written about John Wooden. Just the fact of how competitive he was. You know, he had a very bad reputation as far as his treatment of referees, very controversial in that regard, which is very at odds of the gentlemanly aspect that he tried to convey in his life and on the sidelines. He was not always emotionally connected to his players. A lot of them left their experience playing for him with real feelings of ambivalence toward John Wooden, if not outright resentment in some cases, especially if those guys did not play in the games. The fact that he was thin-skinned and not real tolerant of criticism and very vulnerable to pressure. The 12 years that he won those 10 NCAA championships were in large measure the most unhappy years of his life. He had a lot of great achievers. He was driven by insecurities, which led him to tell stories about his life after he retired that when I went back and recreated, I found a lot of inconsistencies there. And then you have the specter of a man named Sam Gilbert, who was a longtime UCLA booster, who over a period of many years lavished favors on John Wooden's players in direct violation of NCAA rules. Wooden didn't create the situation, didn't orchestrate it, didn't like it, didn't approve of it, but didn't do a whole lot about it. And to the degree that he didn't know certain things, it was because he did not want to know certain things. And then, you know, that does not square with the image of John Wooden as a paragon of integrity. So you know, it was complicated. Life is complicated. But, you know, what I would say to people is John Wooden was not a perfect man, and he did not live a perfect life. But he was an extraordinary man, and he lived an extraordinary life. And I feel extremely privileged to have the opportunity to be able to tell what I believe to be the definitive story of his life.
Well, most definitely that. And I think what I appreciate about it most is that it's not a rose-colored glasses book. You dive deeply into the relationships that you just talked about, whether it be with refs or you know, the guys that he coached that wanted to transfer, not just the All-Americans hugging it out with him after a national championship. Have you gotten any pushback for taking that approach?
You know, I haven't. I kind of expected some, It's still a little early. I mean, it's a long book. It goes up to about 600 pages. I think people maybe are still reading it and still getting it. But I think people have a much wider tolerance for this sort of examination. This is not the dark side of John Wooden. This is not the takedown of a good man. This is just the words that, in the age of Twitter, believe me, I'm getting a lot of instant feedback from people who are reading the book and reviewing the book. I think the two words that are popping up the most, and it pleases me greatly, are balance and detail. This is a very detailed story of a very long and rich life. And I'm very tough on Wooden, I think, but I think I'm very fair to him. And I think it's the biographer's mission not only to tell a story that's accurate and very thorough and very detailed, but that's also placed in its proper context. This is not 2014. He was born in 1910. He was at his heyday professionally in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and you have to provide the context for all these events that are taking his life in these various directions. So, sometimes he made some very good decisions, did some very good things, and sometimes he made some bad decisions. But that doesn't make him a bad person, because we all make bad decisions. So I just wanted to present the full, complete picture with all of its contours and colors, the lights, the darks, and everything in between.
Well, eye-opening, and I really think a lot like Sally Jenkins, her memoir of Pat Summitt. It was eye-opening, and I've been a John Wooden fan my whole life, a Pat Summitt fan my entire life, and you were given access to things that you hadn't been given access to before, and I appreciate that in reading this book as well. You've called him the greatest coach of all time in team sports, period, not just basketball. Make your argument for that. Why do you think that?
Well, because being a college coach, he had consistent roster turnover. Every time he went from one season to the next, he lost players and had to bring in new ones, as opposed to, Red Auerbach, who was able to make his run with the Celtics with Bill Russell on every single team. And John Wooden won a lot of different ways. I mean, people say, well, of course he won all those championships. He had Lou Alcindor and Bill Walton. I say, yep, that's 5. You got 5 to go. He had arguably the two greatest centers ever to play college basketball, and he also, his first team, did not have a single starter that was taller than 6'5". And his last team, the best players on the team were Marcus Johnson and Dave Myers, good players, but no one's building statues of them. So, and then he did it, during a time of incredible social upheaval. I mean, you're talking about being on a college campus in Westwood, California, at the absolute apex of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, black nationalism, the age of Aquarius, the Nixon fallout, Watergate. I mean, Kent State. I mean, he was trying to maintain a semblance of order and always trying to strike that balance, which is so difficult in life. Do you stick to what you know and what your principles are and you become unyielding, or do you adapt to the changing times? And you have to try to strike that balance. Like I said, sometimes he did a good job, sometimes he did a bad job, but it was a heck of a challenge. And all in all, I think you have to say he came out of that fairly well.
When we come back, part 2 of my chat with CBS Sports and Sports Illustrated basketball analyst and writer Seth Davis. If you're looking to get a leg up on your March Madness bracket, folks, you're not going to want to miss this next segment of Game On WDUN.
The other newscasts, and I do listen to them, it's ridiculous.
The station for news.
I always turn to you guys when I want to actually hear, some truth.
North Georgia's News Talk. WDUN.
Cauliflower chicken wings. I'm still waiting on somebody to promise me to bring me cauliflower chicken wings at some point this week leading up to the Super Bowl. Afternoon news wrap. Lillian Wu from Fox News had somebody on that swore she could make cauliflower taste like chicken wings. I swear she is telling a fib. Maybe you've heard of that recipe, though. I'd like to taste it. I'd try it out. I would try it out and then laugh about how it's tasted like cauliflower with buffalo sauce on it. That's not buffalo wings. Tastes just like chicken. Welcome back to Game On, folks. Katie B.Davis here, 17 minutes after 7 o'clock. We're bringing you my conversation with Seth Davis, CBS Sports and Sports Illustrated basketball analyst and writer, who's authored the definitive book on John Wooden. It's titled Wooden, A Coach's Life. We concluded our chat by moving into today's game. And yes, I asked him to make March Madness predictions. But first, who in his opinion is the modern day John Wooden?
Well, we're certainly never going to see 10 championships in 12 years again. This we understand because of what you just alluded to with young players going to the NBA, and God bless them. They're chasing a dream, and I don't begrudge that for anybody. And also, you can't go down the same river twice. This is a different time, and we know a lot more now than we did when John Wooden was coaching. There's a lot more scrutiny, a lot more visibility, and so it's very hard for someone to skate through all of that without having all of these aspects of his personality be revealed. I happen to be a Duke graduate, but I think it'd be hard to argue that if you were going to pick one college basketball coach right now that would be as close to what we have to a John Wooden, I think it would be Mike Krzyzewski, not only based on what he's done at Duke, going to 11 Final Fours, 4 national championships. I think he's played in 8 national championship games, but also with what he's done with USA Basketball and turning that culture around with 2 gold medals and probably a 3rd one on the way here in a couple of years. But there'll never be another John Wooden, and that's why I feel so fortunate, even though I put a lot of work and blood, sweat, and tears into this book, as you can tell by how thick it is. I feel very fortunate that I kind of had the feel to myself here and was able to just really go and talk to everybody and dig everything up and just tell the story in full.
Well, I tell you, it's been called a definitive book. It's been called superb biography. I agree with all of that. And it is, more than anything, an entertaining read about a man's life that I think we all want to be able to dive a little deeper into. So I appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears that you poured into this book. All right, real quick, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a basketball question. Early pick right now, national champion. Who has the makeup of a national champion right now?
Well, gosh, I would have said Michigan State, but, my big caveat with them has always been if they can get healthy. And just when they were getting healthy, they lose yet another player who was watching television and heard an announcer make a comment about himself, and he slammed his hand on the table and broke his hand. And he's going to be out for several weeks now. So it's been very frustrating watching them because I think because of their experience, they had the best combination of talent and experience of any team in the country. But certainly Arizona's been playing terrific basketball. They're a really good defensive team. Syracuse, those have been the 2 best teams in the country. And I think that Florida is going to be right there. I think that Kansas is going to be right there. I've been really impressed with their maturity. So I appreciate you asking me. But as I say, I don't know how many times I can get these predictions wrong. People stop asking me to tell the future. So I'm happy to take the bait every time. There is no clear prohibitive favorite. There's a clear number 1 right now in Arizona. But the only thing that we can truly predict and know is going to be true about the tournament is that it's unpredictable, and I think it's those surprises that make it so much fun.
All right, one last thing, I promise. We do a March Madness bracket challenge with our listeners every year, and this year will be no different. So looking for some insider information, if you can. Who's going to be a VCU this year? Who's going to be a Butler? And I don't really consider VCU and Butler to be mid-majors anymore, not with what they've done in the tournament in consecutive years. But what mid-major, in your opinion, has a chance to make a bit of a run?
Well, first of all, my primary advice to all you bracket filler-outers out there is to not use my picks. Because
nice.
I like to pick upsets and I like to pick chances. And when you do that, the best way usually to do well is to play it safe, and that's just not in my nature. Unfortunately, I'd have a lot more credibility with the public if I did. I think Wichita State is a legitimate Final Four caliber team. It's a different journey that they're on right now, but they did make the Final Four last year. They returned their core. San Diego State is also a top 10 team right now. They might be the best defensive team in the country. UMass, I think, has been off to a good start, a little bit coming down to earth perhaps, but I think they're a really good team with one of the best point guards in the country in Chaz Williams. I think St. Louis in the Atlantic 10 is a team that has all 5 seniors in its starting 5. And then I've been, very praiseworthy of Harvard. Harvard is a team that beat New Mexico last year in the first round of the NCAA tournament, brought everybody back, added 2 players who were suspended last year. Their 2 best players are back on the team and some good freshmen. They've had a lot of health and injury issues as well. If they could ever get everybody together, they could be dangerous. So, but again, I repeat, the beauty of a VCU coming out of nowhere or a Florida Gulf Coast coming out of nowhere is just that. They come out of nowhere and we don't expect it. So, I'm just, I'm looking forward to the tournament, but I also want to enjoy these next several weeks, and the run-up to the tournament and the anticipation of it in some ways is just as fun as the actual event.
Absolutely is, especially the conference championship week. I'm looking forward to that as well. And with Warren Buffett giving away $1 billion, I'm thinking a lot more people are going to be filling out brackets this year that wouldn't.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think his money's safe.
Yeah, we appreciate the insight, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about your great book, Wooden, A Coach's Life. I encourage anyone to go out, get it, and dive in. It's going to take you a while to read it, but boy, it is so worth it. Seth Davis, CBS basketball analyst, writer for SI.com. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me.
Well, thanks for the kind words, and thanks for inviting me on to talk about the book. It was my pleasure.
No surprise, really, that Seth Davis points to Wichita State. But when he threw in Harvard, Katie B was thrown for a bit of a loop. He's absolutely right, though. Harvard having an incredible season by Ivy League standards, though. Let's qualify that. By Ivy League standards. No surprise, though, about Wichita State, San Diego State. It'll be interesting to see who makes a run in March Madness. But more so than that, the teams that make a run to the tournament. You know, that's what makes championship week in college basketball so much fun, is because inevitably you have a few tournaments where the number one seed going into the tournament isn't even in the championship game, much less the winner of the tournament and the overall conference champion. And what you've got are two teams who knew that conference championship, that conference tournament is their only way of getting into the big dance. They'd have to win it. It's the only way it's going to happen for Georgia now. They're going to have to go to the SEC tournament, and they're going to have to win it. Georgia can't even really be considered a bubble team. They're going to have to go to the conference tournament, and they're going to have to win it.
And that was the case for this Georgia men's team only about 4 years ago now.
That's right.
And that run, the last week of the SEC tournament and then making the tournament, that was unbelievably exciting. That is one of the better parts of the season.
It's wonderful. It's fantastic. Sundiata Gaines. Huge tournament. Dennis Felton. That run earned him another year at the helm of Georgia's program. They don't make that run in the conference tournament. They don't make it to the NCAA tournament. He gets fired. I firmly, wholeheartedly believe that. Zach Swansea was big in that tournament as well, folks. Hometown kid. He was huge in that tournament. Well, that's what makes it fun. March Madness is the icing on the cake. It's the cherry on top. That conference championship week is the stuff. That's where legends are made. Unbelievable. I can't wait for it. We've still got a while to go, though. I think Selection Sunday is like March 16th. The tournament starts March 18th. That's my birthday, by the way. Hint, hint. I'm dropping them like they're hot here, folks. Going to be for the next month or so. But it should be a lot of fun. Coming up, folks, we're going to talk a little Super Bowl. No Sean Marino, Champ Bailey, Chris Clemens, the former Georgia Bulldogs in the Super Bowl, Demarius Thomas, excuse me, from Georgia Tech, also in the Super Bowl, a star wide receiver for the Broncos. No Sean Marino, star running back. Champ Bailey, been a star in the league for many, many years, and Chris Clemens doing quite well for himself on the defensive line as a defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. Chris Clemens from Griffin. Didn't even realize that. Champ Bailey, of course, from Folkston. He and his brother Boss were them Bailey boys were good, weren't they, Brian? Back in the day for Georgia. And then what they've done in the league. I know Boss has had to battle injury and whatnot. But Champ Bailey making his first appearance in a Super Bowl. I believe this is his 15th year in the league. So a lot of guys pulling for the Champ Bailey. A lot of guys pulling for the Peyton Manning. At least when Pro Bowlers were asked yesterday who they were pulling for, you saw a lot of the guys, the older guys especially, pulling for Champ Bailey, pulling for Peyton Manning. Of course, the J.J. Watts, who have been in the league all of 4 years, are pulling for Russell Wilson, Richard Sherman in Seattle. It'll be an interesting matchup, though. And coming up on Game On, No Sean Marino has been called the X factor in the game. Why is that? We're going to dive in. And then to wrap things up on this Monday, Chase Elliott won the ARCA CRA Super Series Speedfest 200 last night at Watermelon Capital Speedway in Cordele. And we've got some sound bites from him after the race. Apparently a little bit of contentiousness on the racetrack between he and NASCAR Camping World Truck Series regular Johnny Salter. We'll also hear comments from Chase Elliott about those two getting into it as much as you can on a racetrack. A lot of cutting off of cars, putting people into walls, doing things of that nature. 28 minutes after 7 o'clock. Game On will continue after this short break, folks. Please stick around with us. We got another 30 minutes of sports talk to go here on AM 550 FM 102.9 WDUN.